windmills. You've all seen the Dutch windmills and so on. By the way, the basis for the economic power that was the Dutch, the Netherlands, the first modern empire, really, based on their economics and their technology, was the Dutch. And what was their basis for their power? Wind power. And the windmill was one of those devices. Well, Leibniz saw it, measured all the things and decided to bring it back to Germany. One of the neat things he offered to George was, let me build a windmill to pump the water out of the mines. That was a big problem. So he had a lot of money, actually, given to him in order to build this first windmill in Germany. And he finally got it all working order and everything else. And it was to pump the water out of this mine in the mountains. And something he forgot to check on was the wind. And it turned out that there was no wind in that area. So it was a dismal failure. And of course, George didn't, like dismal failures like that. So that was, part of the reason that he didn't like him. What George mostly wanted Leibniz to do was spend his time doing historical research to prove that George's family line came all the way from Julius Caesar. And Leibniz was bored to death doing that, so he didn't really want to do that. He wanted to do science, and that was kind of like fiction. Can you prove that I'm from Julius Caesar? That explains why I'm such a asshole, I guess. When Leibniz died, only his butler came to the funeral. And yet the Germans now consider Leibniz to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, German genius that ever lived. So that's kind of sad. And he died of the same thing that Nixon had lots of problems with. Richard Nixon, who was a president of ours. First one I voted for, actually, when I was a kid. What's it called when your legs swell up from, there's a name for it.
Lymphoma?
No. I have actually a name for when your legs swell. So you're all right, but that's still not the one that I'm looking for.
Elephantitis.
Oh well. In any case, that's I think what eventually killed him, and he died in his office or room, whatever, in the castle. He was not invited to go with George when George went to England. So George was invited to become the King of England, and so the whole castle and everybody all packed up and went, and Leibniz was all excited because he wanted to go to England, and George said, nope, not you, you stay here. It's kind of nasty. But George was in the area when Leibniz died and had his funeral, but he was hunting and didn't want to go to the funeral of his counselor. So that's kind of sad. But so other things interested in him. That George is from the House of Hanover. He had another important thing is, even though we say he's got publications, all sorts of publications, the monadology, which I should talk about a little bit, and others, they didn't actually have books that he published. Instead, these are all letters that he wrote to people that have been published as his works, right? So at the time, they didn't really have this kind of a publishing thing. not really. And you can see here's what some of his work looks like. It's kind of neat, I suppose. And I mentioned that it's in all different languages, as he needed to write in different things. See here was, he was asked to do some genealogy to prove that the family history of the king was all the way back to Julius Caesar. He was also the founder of the Royal Society in Berlin. And he was all excited, because he was the president of the society and he wanted to be there for its opening and so on, but the king would not allow him to go. So he never actually got to attend any of the meetings of the Royal Society in Berlin. So that's another affront to him. In personal life, he didn't really have one. In fact, famously, he would be at a party and somebody would ask him a question and he would start to answer the question. And the answer was so involved, he wouldn't even realize that person would get bored and walk away and somebody else would be there. And he just kept talking, answering that question to whoever was in the area, and no one knew what the heck he was talking about. Dr. Pangloss, Voltaire was right, really, in making him out to be sort of a social buffoon, because apparently that's the way he was. Another interesting thing was on theology. He was trying to prevent wars from happening, and he was absolutely convinced that the Christians should all unite in one religion again and no longer be Protestants and Catholics. And so he was trying to figure out a way to reconcile Protestants and Catholics together. You might have noticed that we still have Protestant and Catholic and so on, different churches, so obviously it was a dismal failure on his part to try to do that. But he was trying to reconcile people so that they wouldn't fight anymore. Remember Spinoza's idea that you should have truth and tolerance, right? We want truth from science, but we also want toleration for other people that haven't learned all the stuff that we know yet and are on their way. And so we need truth and tolerance. And part of the problem is also that we don't understand one another. So he came up with an idea of having a book that had all like the French words on one side and the German equivalent words on the other side, so that you could, when you're listening to someone speaking French, you have this word, here's the German word, here's the French word, here's the German word. In other words, a tool that would enable translation, because at the time, apparently, the only way for you to understand what the other language the person was speaking was to have a translator who spoke both languages that were relevant, right? Well, he thought, we could create basically a book that would enable us. So basically a dictionary, a French-English dictionary or something, that would enable us to no longer be confused about others. That was an interesting thing that was picked up by Bertrand Russell and others. Part of the reason for the Logic project that they had to create languages, logical languages, was so that we would be able to remove confusion from what we were trying to say. So that if we converted our ordinary language into logical notation, everyone would be able to understand the logical notation. So that would remove the kind of confusions that lead to wars and things. So that was, so he was trying to reconcile religions, trying to reconcile different languages. He was sent by his boss, George, to Paris in order to try to convince Louis the 14th, I think, the Sun King, whichever one was the Sun King, I think the 14th. In any case, the Sun King had a brand new army that was, beautiful on the field. They had white uniforms, marching around on the lawn. They looked absolutely superb. And of course, he wanted to try them out by attacking somebody. And the Germans were worried, at the time they didn't have like Germany. They had a whole bunch of German states. And what they were trying to do was avoid being attacked by, his army. So Leibniz was sent there with the mission to convince Louis to attack Egypt. So he brought a plan for Louis to attack Egypt. And once he attacked Egypt, he could build a canal along what eventually, of course, becomes the Suez Canal. And that would shorten the sea route to the east, right? You could take this canal through and you wouldn't have to go all the way around the Cape Hope of the Horn of Africa, right? Hope is down here and the Horn is over here. But you get the idea. It saves you all that travel, right? So, the French took that plan and put it in the safe and never actually looked at it until Napoleon. And when Napoleon saw it, he thought, good idea. And guess what Napoleon did? He attacked Egypt. And eventually, of course, the French did build the canal exactly the way Leibniz thought it could be done. So that's fun too. And I've got to quit, I guess. What was the quiz question for today? I didn't talk about the monadology. That was one thing I should have done. Monads are spiritual beings. So atoms are not solid material things. They're instead spiritual beings, which almost exactly what we call quarks today. So basically, he was ahead of his time. Does anybody know what the quiz question is? What did I do? Oh, I didn't do this. I'm just looking for the quiz question if anybody else already found it. And have a
What do you think of Jonathan Edwards?
Oh, found it. Thank you. Yes. What do you think of Jonathan Edwards? We never even talked about him yet, but we will next class, which is a week from now. More than a week from now. Jonathan Edwards. Actually, might have mentioned him already, but how are you guys doing? I got a couple of people sent their tests too to me already. So that's fun. What else? Are you having fun?
I am, yeah. It's been a pretty good semester for me overall.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Yep, we haven't had nuclear war. That's been avoided. COVID seems to be regressing a little bit, although I mentioned to some people that one of my friends, a history professor, Paul Dunscombe, died.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I was sad too.
How
A
old
lot
was
of my friends are, I don't really know, but I don't think he was even my age. Maybe,
Huh.
I don't know. But he was still teaching, although I don't know if he's been teaching this semester because he was in the hospital. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I talked to Sung Ho Ha, who's one of the other professors. Always puzzled me because Paul Dunscombe, his specialty was Japanese history. And Paul was raised, in the United States. Sung Ho, on the other hand, was from South Korea. And his specialty was American history. So if you studied American history, you got a South Korean professor. If you studied Japanese or Oriental history, you got an American professor.
Yeah,
So it's
that's
just
funny.
one of those odd quirks.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a lot more interesting when it's